The wool of my old blazer felt rough against my fingers as I did up the buttons that morning. It had been hanging in the wardrobe for nearly 3 years, and the fabric still held that particular smell. A mix of cedar and something older. Something that belonged to a different version of me. I straightened the collar in the bathroom mirror and looked at the man staring back. 63 years old. Gray at the temples. A few more lines around the eyes than I remembered. But standing there in that jacket, with the small silver fern pin on the lapel that my unit had given every one of us when we came home from East Timor, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Steady. Like the ground beneath me was solid again. My son Callum's wedding was in 4 hours. I told myself I was ready. I had been telling myself that for weeks. The drive from Palmerston North to Wellington takes about 2 hours on a good day, longer if the Manawatu Gorge Road is playing up. My neighbor Edna had offered to drive me, bless her. But I wanted the quiet. I wanted the time to organize my thoughts before I walked into a room full of people I mostly didn't know. People from Callum's world. His company. His new life. I drove with the window down a crack, the cold air keeping me sharp. And I thought about the last time I'd worn this blazer. It had been at my wife Margaret's funeral 7 years ago. She would have known exactly what to say to me this morning. She always did. Callum was 41 now. He ran a property development firm based in Wellington, mid-sized but growing fast. The kind of company whose name started appearing on construction hoardings around the city. He had done well for himself. Better than well. I was proud of him. I had always been proud of him. Even during the years when I wasn't entirely sure, he remembered. I existed. His fiancée, soon-to-be wife, was a woman named Priya. I had met her twice. She was warm and clever and laughed easily. And both times I'd come away thinking she was far too good for the version of my son I'd been seeing lately. I hoped the version she was marrying was a better one. The ceremony was at a vineyard just outside Martinborough. When I turned off the main road and followed the gravel driveway between the rows of vines, I could see white marquee tents set up on the lawn, and people in formal wear already moving between them. Expensive cars lined the paddock they were using as a car park. I sat in my old Hilux for a moment after I turned off the engine, looking down at the silver fern pin on my lapel. Margaret had polished it for me once, years ago, with a soft cloth and a small amount of pride that she tried to hide behind practicality. "You earned it," she'd said. "You wear it." I got out of the truck and walked toward the marquee. I found my seat without trouble. I was at a table near the back, which suited me fine. The ceremony itself was held outside on the lawn, under an arch covered in white flowers, and I stood with the other guests and watched my son marry Priya as the afternoon sun came through the clouds over the Tararua Ranges. He looked handsome. He looked happy. When he kissed her and the guests applauded, I clapped along with everyone else, and I felt the particular complicated joy of a parent watching a child succeed, pride mixed with distance, love mixed with the awareness of everything unsaid. We filed into the marquee for the reception. I found my glass of water and sat quietly, watching the room fill. There were perhaps 150 guests. I recognized almost none of them. I caught Callum's eye once across the room, and he gave me a short nod. The kind you give a colleague at a work function, not the kind you give your father at your wedding. I told myself it didn't matter. I was good at telling myself things didn't matter. The entrees came and went. The speeches began. Best man. Maid of honor. Priya's father, a gentleman from Christchurch, who spoke about his daughter with such open tenderness that I had to look at my water glass for a moment. Then Callum stood up to speak. He thanked people. He thanked his business partners, his mentor, the wedding planner, Priya's family. He thanked the vineyard. He thanked, at some length, a man named Derek, who had apparently helped him secure his first major development contract. He did not mention me. Not once. Not even in passing. I sat with my hands in my lap and listened to my son speak for 6 minutes without acknowledging that I existed. When he sat down and the applause filled the tent, the man beside me, a heavy-set fellow in a good suit who I hadn't spoken to yet, leaned over and said quietly, "You doing all right, mate?" I said I was fine. I said it was a lovely wedding. He introduced himself as Gordon Parata. He told me he was a retired police superintendent from Auckland, down for the wedding as an old family friend of Priya's parents. We shook hands, and there was something in his grip and in the steadiness of his eyes that I recognized the particular stillness of someone who has spent years in difficult rooms, making calm decisions. "And you?" he asked. "Father of the groom," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then at the top table where Callum was laughing at something Priya had whispered to him. Then back at me. "Good on you for being here," Gordon said, and left it at that. An hour into the reception, Callum found his way over to my table. I stood up when I saw him coming. Out of habit. The way you stand when someone important enters the room. He was still holding his champagne flute, and his cheeks were flushed from the speeches and the wine and the attention. He looked at me the way you look at something that is slightly out of place. "Dad," he said. "Congratulations, son," I said. "She's wonderful. You're a lucky man." He glanced down at my blazer, at the silver fern pin on the lapel, and the 2 small service ribbons I'd pinned beside it that morning. Nothing dramatic. Nothing showy. Just 2 small rectangles of color that marked 2 tours of duty and 22 years in the New Zealand Army. I had worn them out of respect for the occasion. Because it was a formal event, and because Margaret had always said a man should dress with intention. Callum's expression shifted. Not into anger. Not yet. Into something more like irritation. The way you'd look at someone who'd turned up to a dinner party in the wrong shoes. "What is that?" he said. "My service ribbons," I said. "And the fern pin from—" "I know what they are," he said, cutting me off. His voice dropped but didn't soften. "I mean, why are you wearing them? Here. Tonight. It's a formal occasion," I said. I thought it was appropriate. He looked around the marquee briefly, as if checking who was nearby. Then he looked back at me with an expression I had seen before, the one that said he had already made his decision and was only informing me of it. "Take them off," he said. I looked at him. "They look ridiculous on a blazer, Dad. This isn't a military parade. There are people here, important people. Clients of mine, and I don't want them thinking." He stopped himself. Recalibrated. "Just take them off. Put them in your pocket, please." That last word landed softly, but it didn't change anything. I said no. The word surprised him. I think it surprised me too. Slightly. For a long time, for more years than I wanted to count, I had been very good at saying yes to Callum, or at saying nothing, which amounted to the same thing. I had said yes when he stopped calling for months at a time. I had said yes, or nothing, when he forgot my birthday 2 years running. I had said yes, or nothing, when he moved to Wellington and built a whole life without a single brick of it touching mine. I had been patient and I had been quiet, and I had told myself that was what good fathers did. But not this. Not these. I earned them, I said. I'm wearing them. His jaw tightened. You're embarrassing me in front of my guests. I'm sitting quietly at the back table, I said. I've barely spoken to anyone. Dad? His voice was sharper now. I'm asking you once more. Take them off. And I'm answering once more, I said. No. What happened next took perhaps 3 seconds. Callum reached forward, his fingers closing around the silver fern pin, and pulled. The pin held for a moment. I had fastened it properly that morning, and then the back clasp gave way, and a small triangle of blazer fabric tore with it. I felt the tug at my chest before I understood what he'd done. He had the pin in his hand. He stood there holding it, and I think something on my face made him realize immediately that he had crossed a line he could not uncross. The table had gone quiet. Gordon Parata, beside me, had set down his glass. "Give that back," I said. My voice was very even. That was the army in me, 22 years of learning to be level when everything in you wants to be otherwise. "Dad." "Give it back, Callum." He opened his mouth, closed it. He set the pin down on the tablecloth in front of me and took a step back. The table was very quiet. I picked up the pin. The clasp was bent and one of the backing prongs had broken away. Margaret had given me this pin. Not bought it, she had found it at a garage sale and cleaned it herself because she said it suited me. She had presented it to me on an ordinary Thursday evening, for no reason except that she thought I deserved nice things. I held it in my palm and said nothing. Gordon Parata was looking at Callum with the particular expression of a man who has spent 30 years in the police and knows exactly what he is seeing. "Perhaps," Gordon said, calmly and clearly, "you might want to take a breath, son." Callum looked at him. "I don't believe we've met." "Gordon Parata," he said, and didn't extend his hand. "I was a friend of your wife's family for a long time, and I served with the New Zealand police for 31 years before I retired." He paused. "I know what those ribbons mean. I know what it takes to earn them. And I know what it looks like when a man disrespects something he doesn't understand." "This is a private family matter," Callum said. "It was," Gordon said, "until you made it public." The tables nearby had noticed. Conversations had softened. Heads had turned. I was aware of being watched, and I stared at the pin in my hand and focused on keeping my breathing regular. Callum looked around at the guests near us, seemed to calculate something, and then looked back at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him since he was a teenager. Something close to contempt. "You want to know why I didn't mention you in the speech?" he said, and his voice was quiet but carrying. "Because there's nothing to mention. You were never there. You were always away, always deployed, always on exercise, always somewhere else. Mum raised me. I built everything I have by myself. You don't get credit for showing up tonight in a blazer with some old pins on it." He turned and walked back toward the top table. The marquee felt very still. Gordon looked at me. I looked at the pin. "Take your time," Gordon said quietly. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. Not out of pride, but because it's accurate. What I felt was something older and heavier than tears, a feeling I recognized from a long time ago, from certain nights in Dili in 1999, lying in a sleeping bag in the dark and listening to sounds that might be nothing or might not be, and knowing that whatever happened next, you had to be present for it. You had to stay in your body. You had to breathe. I stayed in my body. I breathed. Gordon didn't say anything for a while, which I appreciated. When the entree plates had been cleared and the main course was being served, he said, "How long did you serve?" 22 years, I said. Regular Army. Finished as a warrant officer class 2. East Timor, 2 tours. 99 and 2001. And a stint in the Solomons after that. He nodded slowly. "What corps?" "Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment," I said. "2nd Battalion mostly." He was quiet again. Then, "Your son doesn't know any of that, does he?" It wasn't a question. I answered it anyway. "He knows I was in the army," I said. "He knows I was away a lot. He was young when Margaret and I decided it was better for her and him to stay in Palmerston North while I was posted. It was hard, on all of us. I made choices I'd probably make differently now." I looked down at the bent pin in my palm. "But I also made choices I'd make exactly the same." Gordon nodded. "He said he built everything himself," I said. "And he has worked hard. I'll give him that. But when he was at Victoria University, he did commerce. Finished in 2007, his fees were paid by a fund called the Tuho Educational Trust, I don't know if he knows that. I don't know if anyone told him where that fund came from. Gordon looked at me carefully. Do you know where it came from? My commanding officer in Timor was a man named Colonel Wiremu Tuho, I said. He retired about 2010, made a fair bit of money in agribusiness afterward, set up the trust in 2004 for the families of soldiers who'd served under him in the Interfet deployment. His way of looking after his people. I looked at the pin. He contacted Margaret in 2004, told her Callum qualified. She accepted on his behalf without telling Callum exactly where it came from. She didn't want him to feel like charity. She just told him it was a merit scholarship. I paused. She told me about it the same year, but by then Callum was already halfway through his degree, and we agreed there wasn't much point in reopening it. Gordon was very still. Does Callum know any of this now? I don't know, I said. I never told him. I assumed he'd worked it out, or that it didn't matter anymore. Gordon looked across the room toward the top table, where my son was laughing, champagne in hand, newly married, at the center of his own story. I think, Gordon said carefully, that it might matter. He asked me if I would be comfortable with him saying something. I told him that was his decision to make, not mine, and that whatever he decided, I would be all right either way. He looked at me for a long moment, in the way that men of a certain profession look at you when they are deciding whether they believe you, and apparently decided that they did. He waited until the main course was nearly done. Then he stood up, tapped his glass, and said he hoped the happy couple would forgive him for one unscheduled addition to the evening's remarks. The room went quiet. Callum looked over from the top table with an expression of mild confusion. Gordon spoke clearly and without drama. He introduced himself, his full name, his rank on retirement, his years of service. He said he had a deep respect for people who served, in any capacity. He said he had been seated this evening beside a man he had only just met, but whom he found himself wanting to introduce properly to the room. His name is Brian Tamaki Shaw, Gordon said. He is the father of the groom. He served 22 years in the New Zealand Army, including 2 operational deployments to East Timor during the Interfet mission in 1999 and 2001. One of the most important peacekeeping operations this country has ever participated in. He was part of the force that helped stabilize a nation that was tearing itself apart. He did that work quietly and without complaint, and he came home and kept on being quiet about it. The room was listening. I sat with my hands in my lap. The ribbons he is wearing tonight, Gordon continued, are not decorations. They are a record. They represent years of service, risk, and sacrifice. And I think it's worth the room knowing that. He paused. There's one other thing, he said. I don't often speak out of turn, but I have 31 years in the police, and I'm a fair judge of situations. So I want to say, as clearly as I can, that what I witnessed at this table earlier this evening was not something I will pretend I didn't see. He looked toward the top table. I think the groom knows what I'm referring to. And I think there's a conversation that needs to happen before this evening is over, not for my sake, and not for the sake of the guests, but for the sake of 2 people at this wedding who deserve better from each other. He sat down. The marquee was so quiet I could hear the wind moving through the vines outside. Then someone near the front began to clap slowly at first, and then the sound spread across the room like something that had been waiting for permission. And within a few seconds, most of the guests were on their feet. I looked at my hands. Across the room, my son was not applauding. He was sitting perfectly still, looking at me, and his face had changed in a way I hadn't seen in a very long time. He looked young. He looked frightened. He came to find me during the break between dinner and dessert. He walked across the marquee, and I watched him come, and I kept my face neutral, because I had learned a long time ago that neutral is not cold. It just means you are giving the other person room to speak first. He stood beside my chair and said, Can we go outside? We walked out past the edge of the tent onto the lawn. The night was cool. The Southern Cross up above us. The lights of Martinborough, just visible in the valley below. We stood next to each other and didn't speak for a moment. "I'm sorry about the pin," he said. I shouldn't have done that." "No," I said. "You shouldn't have." I was embarrassed. "I know. It's a big night, Dad. And I had clients here. And I didn't want—" He stopped. "Tried again. I know that's not a good enough reason." "It's not," I agreed. He was quiet for a while. Out in the vineyard, a moor pork called once and then went silent. "What Gordon said," Callum said, "about a scholarship, a trust." "I never," Mum said. "It was a merit award from Victoria." She never mentioned Colonel. "What was the name?" "Tuho," I said. "Colonel Wiremu Tuho." He said the name quietly to himself. "The way you say something you're committing to memory. He set that up because of your service." "Because of all our service," I said. "There were 14 families who received it over the years. You were one of them," he exhaled. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Your mother made that call," I said. "She thought it was better for you to feel you'd earned the place yourself. She was protecting your confidence. That was her instinct. She always tried to protect you." I paused. I agreed with her at the time. I'm less sure now. "So when I said tonight that I built everything myself, you worked hard," I said. "That's true, and it matters. But no one builds everything alone." "Not really." He was quiet for a long time. A cloud moved across the moon, and then moved on. "You were away a lot," he said eventually. Not as an accusation this time. More like a fact he was turning over in his hands, seeing its different sides. "I was," I said. "I've thought about that a great deal over the years. I made choices. The army was my career, and I believed in the work. I also missed your school plays and your rugby and 3 of your birthdays and more ordinary Tuesdays than I can count, and I knew what I was costing you and your mother, and I told myself the work was worth it." I looked up at the stars. I was right about the work. I'm not sure I was right about the cost. "You could have told me more," he said. "About what you actually did over there." "Yes," I said. "I could have. That's on me. It's easier not to talk about it. And I took the easier road when it came to that." I looked at him. That was a mistake. Men who come back from things like that have a responsibility to tell their children something true about the world. "I left you to find out on your own. That wasn't fair." He nodded slowly. His champagne glass was empty. He was holding it by the stem, turning it gently. "I owe you more than an apology for tonight," he said. "Tonight is a start," I said. A long pause. "I didn't mention you in the speech," he said quietly. "I had a line written. I had it written, and I took it out the week before. Because I was." He stopped. "I don't even know exactly. I told myself it was because you weren't around enough to deserve it. But I don't think that was it. I think I was angry about something I'd never actually said out loud, and I made you invisible instead." He looked at me sideways. "That was cruel. I'm sorry." I held the bent silver fern pin in my hand. The clasp was broken, but the pin itself was undamaged. "I accept that," I said. "I want to fix the pin," he said. "I'll take it to a jeweler in Wellington. Get the clasp replaced properly." "All right," I said, "and I want to." He paused, searching for the word. "I want to know more. About Timor. About the Solomons. About what you actually did. If you're willing to tell me." I looked at him for a moment. My son, 41 years old, standing in a vineyard in his wedding suit with a confused and slightly ashamed expression that I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror a time or two myself. "I'm willing," I said. We went back inside. Dessert had arrived. Gordon raised his glass to me slightly as I sat down, and I raised mine back. Later, after the cake was cut and the dancing had started, Callum found Priya and brought her over to my table. She sat beside me and held my hand and said she was sorry she hadn't noticed what had happened sooner, and that she wanted me to come to dinner in Wellington, properly, soon, and to stay for more than one night. I said I would like that very much. When I left around 10 o'clock, I'm not built for late nights anymore, and I had the drive back through the gorge. Gordon walked me to my truck. We shook hands in the car park, the stars very bright above us. "Thank you," I said. "You didn't have to do that." "I know I didn't," he said. "But some things need saying out loud. That's something I figured out early in the job and never stopped believing." He let go of my hand. "You raised a son who knows shame from the inside. That means you did something right." I thought about that on the drive home. Through the dark Manawatu Gorge, the headlights picking out the road ahead in yellow, the radio off and the country quiet around me, I turned it over in my mind. What Gordon said, what Callum said, what I should have said 15 years ago and didn't. I thought about Margaret. I thought about what she would make of all of it. The broken pin, the speech with no mention of me, the more pork in the vineyard, the handshake in the car park. She would have had something very dry and very precise to say about all of it. And she would have made me laugh at least once. And then she would have said, "Well, go to bed, Brian. Tomorrow still comes, whether you're ready or not." She was right about that. As she was right about most things. I held the bent pin on the passenger seat beside me the whole way home. That was 8 months ago. The pin is fixed now. Callum took it to a jeweler in Cuba Street and had a new clasp put on. Solid brass this time. And he gave it back to me over dinner at his house in Karori on a Saturday evening in August. Priya made a lamb roast. We stayed at the table for 4 hours talking about things we had never talked about before. I told them about Dili in 1999, about the checkpoint near Bakora where our patrol spent 3 nights watching a situation that could have gone several different directions and didn't, because everyone held their nerve. About the families we helped move through the corridors. About the heat and the waiting and the strange flat quality of sound after a firefight. I told them about the Solomons, about the men I served with, what they were like, what some of them were like when they came home, and what some of them couldn't put down. Callum listened to all of it. He asked good questions. He is his mother's son. In that way, she was a good listener too. I have come to believe, at 63, that silence between people is almost never neutral. It is either chosen or it happens by default. And the ones that happen by default are usually the ones that do the damage. I was silent about my service for too long. And that silence left a space that Callum filled with his own version of events, one where I was simply absent, unexplained, and not worth explaining. We are not the same people we were 8 months ago. We won't go back to being strangers at formal events. We won't go back to short nods across a room. I have told my son what I did and where I went and what it cost. He has told me things too, things about the years in Wellington when he was driving himself hard and lonely and not sure he was going to make it. Years I knew nothing about because I had not been close enough to know. We have given each other information that we needed a long time ago. Better late, I think, than not at all. The silver fern pin sits on my dresser now, next to a photograph of Margaret. The new clasp is stronger than the old one. I keep meaning to move the photograph to the sitting room where there is better light, but I find I like it where it is, in the morning when I'm getting dressed, that particular face looking back at me. There's something I want to say to anyone who is holding a silence that has gone on longer than it should. Not just between fathers and sons, between anyone. The silence feels safe, because breaking it is uncertain. And certain pain feels easier to carry than uncertain outcome. But silence has a cost that accumulates quietly over years. And one day you turn around and the distance has become so ordinary that you've stopped registering it as distance. You've started calling it normal. It isn't normal. It's just familiar. The difference matters. Callum and I have a long way to go, and we are both old enough to know that 2 good conversations do not undo 20 years of missing each other. But we are facing the right direction now. That counts for something. Go tell the people in your life what they mean to you. Go ask the questions you've been saving for later. Go find out who your people actually are. What they did, what it cost them, what they're carrying. Don't wait for someone like Gordon Parata to stand up at a wedding and say the thing that needed saying. Say it yourself. Before it needs saying in a room full of strangers. Before the pin gets bent.